today we're talking about trauma, what it is and what are the solutions to addressing it, and what are the programs that are doing this work. We've got some remarkable leaders here with us today from different parts of the country, leaders that are focused on helping crime victims recover from trauma. I'm excited for today's episode to talk about trauma in this incredible model called the Trauma Recovery Center, which is a comprehensive model to meet the needs of the most marginalized crime victims, to address barriers to recovery and to help crime survivors heal. My guests today are Dr. Dorit Saberi from the Safe Harbor Trauma Recovery Center in Los Angeles, California, and also Stephen Massey from the CitiLookout Trauma Recovery Center in Springfield, Ohio. But before we jump into the conversation, a bit of background on how crime survivor safety and justice came into this issue of trauma and advocating for trauma recovery services. So we started with a small group of diverse crime victims, to ask about their experiences in recovering. So we asked this question: what matters most to help crime victims? What do crime victims need? The top answer across the board was support recovering from trauma. That small group then sought out to see what was out there in this way that kind of helped crime victims who were falling through the cracks. One program in San Francisco, we went and toured this center and talked to their leadership. We found out that they were struggling to maintain resources to stay open. At this time, it was the only program of a trauma recovery center model in San Francisco, the only one in the nation, but was struggling to keep their doors open. So we set out to get more funding for that one TRC, so we can see that model grow in 2013. But since then, our advocacy through legislation, through state budget requests, and meeting with elected officials and state leaders, we've been able to grow that model to 39 trauma recovery centers across the country in 9 states. So it's been so exciting to see this model grow across the country. And I'm excited to have 2 leaders that are doing this incredible trauma recovery center work in their respective communities. So let's get into it. So let's start with you, Dorit. You are in Los Angeles. This is one of the nation's largest cities, in a place that has been a center of a lot of attention related to shifting crime rates and safety issues like gun violence or gangs. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get involved in your work to support crime victims, and why?
Yes, thank you, Aswad. I work at Harbor UCLA. It's one of the largest county hospitals, level 1 trauma hospitals in LA County, one of 3. And I have worked with trauma survivors for about 20 years, the entirety of my career as a psychologist. I started with children, youth, and young adults in the juvenile justice system, in correctional settings with adults. My goals there were to reduce recidivism and really find healing outside of correctional systems. So I worked with mothers, with young children who were duly diagnosed and kind of were victims of the revolving door, coming in and out of jail and being convicted for crimes largely that they either did not commit or were coerced to commit because of an abuser. Many were survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and so on. And then I moved on from there to work at Harbor and was writing a grant to receive the Trauma Recovery Center at Harbor UCLA. And the grant is through the California Victim Compensation Board. And I've been working there since 2019. It was the inception of the Safe Harbor Trauma Recovery Center.
Awesome. Thank you. And we're going to hear more about the Safe Harbor Trauma Recovery Center in LA. Stephen, would love for you to introduce yourself and how did you get involved in this work in supporting victims of crime, and why?
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm just very honored and just really excited to be here. And so it's funny, some of our backgrounds are similar. I've done some youth work, and and worked with kids in settings such as group homes, and did youth work and juvenile centers, and did some stuff with developmental disabilities, and just the work just carried on through addictions work, working for an addictions agency for probably 15 years, and then moving on to behavioral health. Just there's an intersection and just a passion for people. And then the opportunity was brought to us by our Ohio Attorney General, who was able to listen to ASJ and the TRC out of UC San Francisco, and Dr. Alicia Basilari. And so we were all summoned to listen. And when I heard about what was going on, I was all in. And I'll tell you what, it's been the most rewarding piece of work I've been a part of thus far in my journey.
Well, thank you so much. So excited about this conversation because we're talking about trauma recovery. I remember, just years ago when I was a victim of gun violence, going into that hospital, suffering from those wounds and being discharged from the hospital, not connected to any services to help me heal. And that's why the Trauma Recovery Center is so important of why we need to meet the needs of crime survivors. So, Stephen, also want to hear a little bit from you about your program, City Lookout, and kind of impact your work have in your community. So, Stephen, like Springfield, Ohio, which is very different from Los Angeles. This is a city less than 100,000 residents in the Midwestern part of the country, and yet there are similarities in terms of poverty as well as concentrated violence. Can you tell us a little bit about the City Lookout Trauma Recovery Center and work that you all are doing?
Yes, the City Lookout Trauma Recovery Center was a small, just grassroots nonprofit refuge center where we did a lot of trauma counseling and working with underserved communities. Our goal was to make sure that people were served regardless of their ability to pay. If they could not pay, we would still serve them. And from springing into a TRC, we were able to just kind of model what was done in UC San Francisco. So we're a standalone community-based TRC, and we work with hospital systems. We have a Trauma 1 and Trauma 2 that are close to us. We also work with our prosecutors, victims witness office, and we do a lot of work with the state, and we do a lot of work with the other TRCs who are in other cities as we kind of cross-refer and serve survivors. But we've been able to just provide that comprehensive piece of counseling, advocacy, and advocating for victims and their rights and making sure that we help them move forward in their journey. It's just been a joy for me to go down in the trenches and work with even young Black men and people of color who would normally not get victim services, and to tell them. And it's just amazing how many people don't even know that they're entitled to be served by a TRC. And we're just grateful we have one here. We've had a mass shooting in our city in Springfield, and so we've worked closely with the Dayton mass shooters, and we work with some of the survivors from that crime and the families and co-victims, and so we're just here to help the community heal and do our part.
Wow, such incredible work of meeting the needs of young men of color, which as a survivor myself and traveling this country, there aren't a lot of services for young men of color, and to hear that you are this is a population that's underserved, and that you are meeting that needs. We once again, we'll hear more about the work that you all are doing. Dorit, you are over there in Los Angeles. Stephen mentioned that his TRC is it's more community level and work in partnership with hospitals and law enforcement and other key stakeholders. Can you tell us a little bit about the Safe Harbor TRC and the program and services that you all provide to the community?
Sure. Yeah, we work as part of the Harbor UCLA County Hospital. We're also funded by CalVCB, and our mission is really to provide holistic care based in social justice systems. So really also embrace the idea of social justice and work with the community. And we do that by, again, offering the free, the same as Stephen was talking about, free, regardless of insurance and regardless of crime. So the crime doesn't have to be reported. There doesn't have to be a police report, as long as it's a factor of interpersonal violence. And we provide care for people who survive domestic violence, sexual traumas, human trafficking, refugees and asylum seekers, and really everyone that could be under that umbrella of interpersonal violence. We also work with communities in terms of providing training, consultation, education, collaboration, and we have a number of stakeholders and community partners. One of them I can mention is After Innocence, and it's a legal foundation that works with exonerees, people who were convicted of crimes and served time and now were found innocent. And after many, many years in prison, are now released and are trying to be reintegrated and find a life worth living, essentially, and are running into obstacles. So we do specific outreach for that organization. We also work in unison with Fostering Unity, which is a nonprofit organization that works with foster children and resource parents, and really try to increase stabilization so that there isn't the frequent movement in the foster care system, and the children receive the care and nurturance they need in order to avert trauma in the future. And this one is actually near and dear to my heart, being a resource parent and an adoptive mom myself, and also seeing the effects of intergenerational trauma, being someone who is also from a refugee background. So our focus is really to increase that stability and permanence and avert the future trauma, as I was saying.
So, Dorit, so you have a lot of people who are listening across the country who may not know what trauma is. So, what is trauma, and what kind of impact can it have if people do not get the support to address it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can think of trauma as the emotional response to any distressing event. And we used to think that it would be an event that most people would be distressed about, but really we think about it more as a subjective idea of this being distressful to someone. And it could be natural disasters, the human trafficking experience, it could be gun violence, it could be even, in a sense, a type of abuse or neglect in a home, which to the outside observer may seem mild, but for a particular child, it's extreme because of their particular sensitivity. So we usually think of childhood trauma in terms of adverse childhood events, and there are a number of them. And when we think about them, we really see that there is effect on their future. So things like maternal depression or sexual abuse, emotional sexual abuse, substance abuse in the family, emotional neglect, even divorce, mental illness, incarceration or homelessness in the family. And all these really contribute to medical sequela, psychological sequela, lots of health conditions. If you have 3 or more of these ACEs I just mentioned, can cause a vast increase, anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40% increase in these health risks. And so the other sequela of trauma can be demands on the person's ability to thrive, to have freedom, to actualize their life in the way they envisioned when they were younger, before this trauma occurred, giving up life goals. And then the more classic syndromes that we think about that are associated with PTSD, like the hypervigilance, the flashbacks, similar to what people who survived battle, veterans who are coming back and are experiencing. I think the most important sequela that I really run into is the cognition that they're not good enough, the negative cognitions about themselves and their efficacy. Somehow the idea of I'm damaged, I'm injured, it's hopeless, that could be the more chronic and I think the more devastating or debilitating part of trauma.
That's a great point, Dorit. Trauma affects so many people, and dealing with trauma without support can lead to people losing jobs, housing, experiencing family stress, re-victimization, and even self-medicating with substances. Stephen, how does trauma, how does that relate to the criminal justice system? Like based on your work and your experiences of working with survivors, what are the experiences of victims, when they have interacting with the justice system in the aftermath of crime?
I would echo what we've just heard of that. It's interesting you were just talking about. I was just thinking about along the lines of many survivors who have been exposed even to the criminal justice system and then go on to be survivors of crime, whether it be past or present. That there is a mindset that, and even society, they have this way they portray crime survivors is that you did this, we don't care, but look what you did in the past. And it's kind of like something that haunts them. And it's like a stigma that is carried that should not be carried for any human who needs to be able to like recover, heal, grow, thrive. And so, just even with victims compensation, we know that's a battle in itself that many of us have been working on, and ASJ has championed along with other people around the nation to fight for survivors of crime, to make sure that we are not stigmatizing them and continue to punish them and make them feel like they're worthy and hopeless when something bad happens to them that we should be supporting them with.
And you all are just really bringing up, some, major challenges. I heard from you all talk about like the TRC that that survivors don't have to pay. I heard you all talk about the barriers and accessing things like victim compensation, the impact of like PTSD having on crime survivors. So this is a trauma and people not getting the help they need. Like that is a major challenge. The victims compensation program is often the primary source of help for victims that don't have anywhere to go for support. It's the payer of last resort for families, but many people don't know about it or they get denied when they apply because they don't qualify for being eligible. And it's not something that's really addressed, especially in communities most impacted by crime. Those communities are least supported by the justice system. Let's talk about the solutions. Dorit, would love to start with you. How do trauma recovery centers help? Can you share examples of how trauma recovery centers support victims of crime?
Absolutely. So the trauma recovery centers are based in a trauma-informed care model. So the idea is to outreach and engage in a way that creates safety, that creates rapport, and that can even start at bedside, even in an ICU. So, Aswad, you were talking about being a survivor of gunshot wound, and you didn't get that care right out of the hospital. So, trauma recovery centers in general, and specifically ours, since we're based in a hospital, we begin our outreach during that hospitalization after a crime has occurred. And we're there not just to support the person who is the survivor, who is there in the hospital, but also the families. The other emphasis of many trauma recovery centers, and our own especially, is to work with families. And we do that, again, in the hospital during that outreach phase. We work with other communities like community organizations like NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, in the South Bay chapter. And we work with them for referrals and also to support survivors of crime and survivors of trauma because they have lived experience. They are families who may have survived it. So they're right there alongside us doing some of the outreach and speaking to other families and providing that support and being our partners. We provide evidence-based psychotherapy, and that's important when you're starting to integrate the trauma and make sense of it, make meaning of it, and maybe get to a place where it doesn't have to be PTSD, that it's actually post-traumatic growth or even resilience building in the long run. So our evidence-based modalities really focus on resiliency building. The way we think about trauma-informed care is to create that safety, that collaboration. The person feels like they have a voice. They're not told what to do. We join them and go on this journey of where to find that freedom and where to find that thriving that can enhance their life despite of what happened. We also think of social justice issues and think about how to advocate at a macro level. How do we reach the bigger political system? How do we reduce structural oppression? And how do we really look at what needs to change at a fundamental level in order to create better resilience for communities? We call it radical healing. How do we heal from those wounds and really thrive as communities? That's some of the work we do.
That's great. Radical healing. Wow. That is so powerful. And even the name itself, trauma recovery, is also speaks a lot. Stephen, would love to hear more about, you all's work in Springfield. I know you do a lot of work working with young men of color. How do trauma recovery centers help? And can you share any example of how trauma recovery centers support victims of crime?
I think I first want to start with the fact that we are big on collaboration, and we have made sure that the established victim service providers that we partner with them, like our women's domestic violence shelter, the prosecutor's office victims witness, and any other agencies, our children's services agencies, any agencies that where there is a lot of trauma and people who are trying to impact and help people in trauma. I'm thinking about one of the niches to TRCs is that the cultural aspect of us coming beside people and honoring their culture, making sure that we don't think we know how to serve them, but knowing and finding more about who they are and what they value, opposed to what we think they should be valuing. Just working with young Black men, working with like refugees, immigrants, working with LGBTQ, transgender population, knowing that we need to make sure that they understand that we're there for them and we love and care for them, and that they deserve to be treated with dignity and they need to be honored. And I always like to use this phrase that I heard the first time we were doing some of the things with ASJ and the TRCs, is that we want to make the survivor the expert on their life. We want to make sure that we honor that piece because it's their life, and we want them to live the life that they want to live, and that we give them things according to what they say they need. We have the therapy-based interventions that we practice. And what I love about our TRC is that we've been real intentional about creating a diverse service here with people who are, we've got counselors of color. We have, counselors with different backgrounds, and we make sure that we serve people according to that. And we actually incorporate that piece with inside of our team. We're big on DEI, and we want to make sure that we always are checking one another, trying to grow and get better so we can stay in the game to do the right thing. And so it's been a joy. I love our work here in our small town.
Can I just add a quick
Of
thing?
course. Yep.
Many aspects of care begin with just the basic needs. So safe housing, if someone wants to go back to work, how do we assist with that? So this idea of doing service partnership, or another word for case management, to create that safety and to not necessarily have to be victims anymore because of circumstance, because of lack of funds, or because of lack of appropriate housing, because of housing density, being in public sector types of jobs, and being exposed to the pandemic more often as well, and that affecting communities of color. So how does trauma really impact communities in an inequitable way, and how do we come in to resolve some of these inequities is also one of the missions, I think, for all TRCs.
Yeah, could I add something real quick to that? And just giving them the power of choice, restoring that, making sure that the choice is theirs. It's amazing to work with a survivor who's distressed and to be somewhere with them and do something as simple, like you were saying with basic services, as to say, what do you want to eat? Where do you want to eat? And to see their head lift up and say, it's your choice. Whatever you want. What do you want? And to see them take that command, and that starts, it just starts the cycle of them being able to say, hey, I get to make some choices today. And that's what we want them to understand, that this is your life. And this is the beginning of a journey for you to start making choices about what you want, who you are, and what you deserve, and what you need. It's fun. I love it.
Thinking about, as you mentioned, like the personal safety of survivors, but also community safety. Like, why is it important to support victims in recovering from trauma that they have went through?
Yeah, when they know that they have a TRC behind them, even the systems tend to respond differently, knowing that we're with them, we're walking with them. They know they have reinforcement, and they know we're serious, and they know we're there to make sure the diligence is due. And so that makes a huge difference, opposed to the way that things have been in the past, where even if survivors are in a line for services, they kind of show up. They don't know what to expect. They don't know, what grand jury's like. They don't know if they have a choice to sit through a trial and look at exhibits that they don't have to. Things of that nature, just being able to walk and navigate that process, saying, hey, as a survivor, you have rights. You can choose to do this or that, and don't let anyone, and also bringing law enforcement and other providers on board to let them understand and vet them to know that you can't do this and that you shouldn't do this. Even if you're desperate for information, you're not going to do this to the survivor that we're serving, and they're going to know their rights. It's been good.
And Dorit, you mentioned something earlier about, the Trauma Recovery Center. When I think about TRC, it's not the traditional way of providing services to victims. Earlier, you mentioned that, at the Safe Harbor TRC, not only do you all provide service for victims, but you also have that social justice lens as well. Steve, you mentioned that, a lot of people who've come in contact with the justice system have been victims of crimes before, and that, their trauma went unaddressed. So, Dorit, would love to hear from you. What can people in the justice system learn from victims recovering from trauma?
I think the first and foremost idea is that the non-judgmental, non-pathologizing view of trauma, really thinking about a resilience lens, not what's wrong with you or even what happened to you, but how are you strong and resilient, and how do we support enhancing you coming back to that resilience point. I think justice system needs to really focus more on rehabilitation and care and recovery. The idea of justice systems being the criminalization of mentally ill, and that movement that began many years ago that now lends to prisons and jails being the largest in many states, 44 states to be exact, the largest mental health facilities in the nation. Twin Towers is one of them. The largest mental health facility in the nation is Twin Towers Correctional Facility. And this is the first line of theoretical care to people suffering with mental illness, or even just the effects of this trauma we're talking about, the structural injustices, the oppression, the discrimination, the harassment. And so we really need to think about how does care really begin in these settings, if they have to be the first settings, and maybe diversion programs, enhancing those, increasing funding for diversion, finding alternatives to jail sentences and prisons when it's warranted and when it's possible. Our nation is the lowest compared to others in the modern world, in non-third world countries, where the crimes are punished as opposed to really being addressed as a rehabilitation effort. I think that's what I would like to impart to law enforcement and the legal system.
Yep, and Steve, I know you do a lot of work with law enforcement. We'd love to hear from you. What can people in the justice system learn from victims recovering from trauma?
Yeah, I think what we've been able to do with law enforcement locally is make sure that we partner with them on trainings to where we're informing one another about this progressive model and how there's a better way to care for survivors and community. One of the things that we have gone to, which has really helped us to bridge the gap with law enforcement and the way that they're seeing things, to get a different lens and a perspective, is that our Speakers Bureau, where we've vetted a few speakers who have been survivors of crime, who, like, as you were mentioning, the resilience piece, being able to share their stories, even to like networks such as like law enforcement outlets and different providers, and getting them on like in spaces where they can just tell their story, and that really what life has been like for them and what it is now and how they are healing. And now they are a valuable asset to the community, to just break that cycle and stigma about even someone who's had some past criminal activity or involvement, that we don't need to continue to like beat them down and keep them down. We want them to come back and join community and be contributors. And we see that we have so many success stories in that fashion, and we're going to keep on bringing those to the table. Definitely. You're looking at one right here. Definitely.
Yeah, most definitely. And crime survivors speak, the power of, one thing I love about crime survivor safety and justice is building, a community of survivors, providing that peer-to-peer support, providing opportunities for survivors to tell their stories of triumph, their stories of resilience that can help so many other crime survivors. So excited to just hear, about you all Speaker Bureau, and how you all are, not only providing services that are much needed for survivors, but also having them engage in advocacy, having them engage in changing policies to better support their community. So you all have been, trauma recovery centers. You all have been operating for a few years now. And I know you all are doing amazing work. I know there's more work that you all will be doing. Dorit, would love to start with you. If you could have a magic wand, what would you want to see to help victims recover? So our listeners are crime survivors, organizations, elected officials, key stakeholders, influencers at the federal and at the national and local level. If you had that magic wand, what would you want to see to help victims recover?
I love that magic wand question, Swad. Yeah, I think what's needed is a vast political, economic, and systems approach to healing individuals and radical healing, again, of communities. And that really necessitates a fundamental change in the way we see those trauma survivors, the way we think about trauma, the way we perceive what this idea of resilience is, and how to promote it. And so there should be advocacy, not just at a victim's compensation and victim services, but really starting at a very young age. Our trauma center begins with age 3. So really working with children to really offset those adverse childhood events. And so I'd like to see more funding, more resources, more education, more work with law enforcement in terms of training, something we also do, but we need more of that. And that doesn't just come to dollars and cents. It comes to making this a priority, making this a actual incentive to promote this healing we're talking about. That's not only just cost saving, but it's a way to promote human thriving and lessening suffering.
Thank you, Dorit. What about you, Steve? If you could have that magic wand, what would you want to see to help victims recover?
Yeah, on a macro level, I'd like to see the administration take a deeper look, a deeper dive into what these centers are doing, the impact that they're having across the nation, even with 39 and counting. I was at 35, and so they're growing. But I really believe that in Washington, we need a line item, a major line item that would allow us to do everything that she mentioned. And that it goes far beyond just the funding piece, but we definitely need the funding in order for these centers to be in different cities. And I like the fact that we do want to start working with survivors and people in trauma at a very young age. So even like here at our agency, one of my wish lists would be for us to have the funding to bring on more youth advocates to work with youth who are trained professionals to do that youth work, and also more clinicians who are geared. And we have a few, but I want more, because I just would like for it to spread like wildfire in our community to where more people are served at the gates of trauma and being in distress, to where we can really have impact and the stories will grow and we'll have a healing community.
A healing community. As part of my, work at Crime Survivor Safety and Justice, we need a trauma recovery center in every city in this country. Every day, people are experiencing crime and violence with little support to help them heal and recover. And so, just thank you all for just the incredible work that you all are doing to really help victims heal, but also to help their family heal as well. When someone is a victim of a crime, it not only impact that individual, but it impacts that entire family. It impacts the community as well. So just really want to thank you all for, the great work that you and your staff are doing on the front lines every day to provide the support for survivors. Before we close out today's episode, as I mentioned, we have 70,000 members. We work with, dozens of organizations across the country. And listening, we have people across the country, that have joined, together to support each other and to advocate for change. We created this Crime Survivor Speak podcast for our members. So would love to hear from each of you. Do you have a closing message that you would like to share with our crime survivor network across the country? Dorit, let's start with you.
Absolutely. And I think the most profound message is that a trauma doesn't have to mean a lifelong suffering because of post-traumatic stress, that there is a way to build resilience and grow after a traumatic event. And what it takes is integration and being able to find meaning from what happened and get the support and get the advocacy and get the resources to actually promote this growth I'm talking about, but that it is possible. It does take a whole village to create it, but it is not an impossible task to dream for and achieve. And it really begins with even small measures of perceived freedoms that then actualize to a better life.
Thank you. And what about you, Stephen? A message that you would like to share with crime survivors across the country?
I would simply say that we hear you, we see you, and we are with you, but we have so much more work to do for you and with you. And our hopes are that this would continue to be a unity link where more crime survivors would be empowered to move forward and do more work and share this work with others, and that in an abundance that we would all be able to continue to watch communities heal across our nation in ways that we never have before, like a movement. Just we know this is a movement. We want this movement to continue to grow and move forward. And so all hands on deck, as we say here in our agency, that we're here for you, we see you, and we're with you, but we still need to do a lot more for you and with you to honor you, to see you through this.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dorit. When survivors speak, change happens. Thank you, Dorit and Stephen, for joining today's episode of Crime Survivors Speak. We need to invest in trauma recovery centers. We know that communities across the country, we cannot wait. We need help, we need healing, and we need to recover. So invest in trauma recovery centers. If you want to learn more about the Trauma Recovery Center model, you can go to www.cssj.org, where we have resources and links to each trauma recovery center across the country. And once again, at the federal level, at the state, and at the local level, listen to crime survivors and invest and champion models that are meant to support those who are most harmed and least help. To read more about the Trauma Recovery Centers, you can download the Trauma Recovery Center manual. Also, you can read the CSSJ National Crime Victims Agenda, which really speaks to a lot of the policy solutions that we heard from today's guests. Once again, thank you for joining today's episode of the Crime Survivor Speak podcast. Talk to you soon.